Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Lady Leadership Podcast. Really excited to have today on the show Amalia Chilianis. And I did actually practice that pronunciation. Welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Nice to be here.
Now, Amalia is a career and capability development expert. She's a coach, consultant, speaker, and she's got 25 years experience in large, complex global and national organizations, some big names. And she's recently written a new book, which is Workholistic.
Yes, that's right.
Tell me, let's dig into it. Tell me about the book first. Let's get into that.
Well, I was motivated to write the book because I worked for General Motors Holden with the express purpose of supporting the closure of manufacturing and helping 3,000 workers secure gainful employment into an industry which no longer existed. So they really had to make a significant career change, and we had the best success rates that we can find anywhere else. So, more than 90% participated, and almost all of those secured gainful employment. And it required a real significant change. And I wanted to understand why was that program so successful. And I went back and I interviewed the managing director and I interviewed a lot of the professionals. And what I found is, we're all very good at working the process, but in actual fact, what made a really successful change for people was when the change really worked well with what else was important in their life. When they made decisions based on work, not only for themselves, but for their family. When they took better care of their health, they performed better. And so I found these, even though the stories were all really different of where people went and what they did and how they went about it, I found some really consistent themes in what made the difference for people.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to tell their story in the hope that it would be helpful for other people in making a change.
And did GM Holden go into that saying, and because I find this really interesting, and this is a big reason I wanted to interview you, because I'm really kind of fascinated with those stories around the world where an underperforming team, say, has shifted into a performing team, and so I'm really interested in, the intent that GM Holden had. So obviously they had the intent that they wanted to help people find work above and beyond just, kind of saying, see you later.
Absolutely. It was a real shift. So it was a fundamental shift. If you can imagine the psyche of GM, particularly being very US centric, they have a very different approach to letting people go.
Yeah.
And there's always been a long held fear, I think, from many corporations that if we give people a lot of notice, they're going to do the wrong thing.
Right.
And look, in their defense, they had a very expensive manufacturing line, and if anyone wanted to cause any damage, it would be very costly.
Yeah, and detrimental to the company, really.
Correct, and also detrimental to other people's safety. So, they had that first and foremost. But this closure, because it was so public, it was such a political thing at the time, which actually what the politicians and the media probably didn't realise is it played out politically, with Joe Hockey calling the company out and saying, Holden, come clean, blah, blah, blah. But actually people were personally devastated by that because they had tried to do the right thing. So GM committed and supported from a money and a permission perspective. They were absolutely very committed to people's well-being and health.
Yeah.
And wanted to make sure that people were safe. But other than that, they pretty much handed over the money to me and two of my colleagues, and the three of us designed how the program would run and that real holistic approach that we took. And we really pushed the boundaries. We got things done that people had never done before. So, for example, career transition programs, corporates just, it's really a tick the box exercise, right? They don't pay attention if people participate. But we asked that. We want to know where people are. We want to know that they're successful.
You dug down.
That's right.
Into a couple of layers. Yeah,
we did, and we made them be accountable for it as well. Where they actually said to us, "No company's ever asked us to do that before." And we also said, if you think someone is a red flag, if you think someone is struggling, and we need to take a bit more care with that person, we want to know. And so, luckily for us, that didn't happen too often, but we did take that extra amount of care just to make sure that people were safe and well, even though, technically they were no longer with the company.
Yeah, right. I mean, what are some of the examples that people went on to do? Because 3,000 people is a big workforce, and you would have had lots of layers of
Lots of
capability
layers.
and role, and and you would have had people on the shop floor. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
From a manufacturing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the Adelaide plant being in Elizabeth, I mean, Elizabeth has a very high unemployment rate and, you know, a real challenge. But we had some great success stories with people going into, say, aged care.
Yeah, right.
And things like that. We had a lot of people just simply doing really simple things like getting, you know, ticket forklift licenses and,
Right.
you know,
So
construction licenses, and we funded that. That was the big
Yeah.
difference as well. We knew the industry was changing, and not only did we help them understand the job market and how to get another job, we paid for money towards retraining. But again, the difference, because of my colleagues and my experience, people don't know what they should be going after. Let me give you an example. One person wanted funding for a web development course. And I went, oh, you're going into IT, are you? And he's going, no, I want to run a travel adventure business. And I'm like, well, do you know how to run a business? No. Well, you're probably better off doing a certificate in small business.
Yeah.
Because you can probably pay someone pretty cheaply to develop your website for you. But if your core business, you know, is running a business, then that's where we need to spend your training money. So initially people felt that we were being a little bit, you know, too hand-holding, but once they realised the value we could add in making sure their time and their money was spent in an area that would actually deliver real benefits to where they wanted to go, they understood and got on board with it.
So you really created a program then to, you know, work with people, and so you gave people a lot of time and said the location's going to be, or the plant or the factory or the not a warehouse, manufacturing plant, it's going to be closing down in X. We're going to be then, so you're pretty clear about maybe the stages, because it doesn't all just kind of close out on one day, I would have thought.
Exactly.
And then you worked with those people around, okay, here's some money. We want to help you retrain. We're going to help you find a new role. How can we do that for you? What are you interested in? What are you,
And we did a lot more, but, you know, we had the time, the permission, and we had the investment as well. So we promoted job opportunities. You know, we, particularly from an Adelaide perspective, you know, they were very active in the Adelaide market, saying we've got these amazing people, you know, and we brought jobs in. We also, what was really different in the change was we had a plan for everyone. So particularly, say, from a, you know, corporate head office perspective here in Port Melbourne, you know, it was a staggered, reduced approach. So we worked with every person to try and go, well, when, you know, what's your preference? You know, because people could sort of see it through, or some chose to leave a bit earlier. So a real difference in approach.
Rather than just, you know, tapped on the shoulder on Friday and told, sorry, you're off.
Exactly. Pack a box and someone will escort you to the car.
Or not that visibility of when you are going to be impacted as well.
Yeah. And look, it didn't always work, but at least there was an open dialogue, and at least people felt like they had some say. You know, normally there's no say in these processes, and normally there's no heads up that it's coming. And I think the difference is people ruminate. What really upsets me in the corporate world is that, you know, people are smart. You know,
they make stuff up. If they're not told what's going on, they make stuff up because they're focused on how does it impact me.
Absolutely. And when you don't have that sense of control, or at least knowing, then it's a lot harder to deal with. And I think it was that sense of knowing and the ability to have a say that helped people get through what was potentially a 3-year program. You know, it's hard to stay motivated for 3 years.
It's hard to stay motivated for 3 years. And then I'm also sure that there was redundancies there in that as well. And there was probably people with different lengths of service. So there was some money in it to sort of hang around as well until, you know, your time, I suppose.
Yes. I mean, they were very generous packages. There was some significant money. You know, the average tenure was 17 years, but a lot of people had been there for 30.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Exciting. Well, I mean, like exciting in terms of, you know, the ability to help people in that way.
Yeah. And I think, some of the stories that really resonate for me, for example, a young engineer who'd gotten into engineering because his dad was an engineer and his grandpa was an engineer. But actually, he'd always just wanted to help people. And he was really drawn to becoming a nurse. And so, he used the permission, okay, I've got a bucket of money. I've got money towards training. I'm going to retrain and do what I'd actually always wanted to do, but had kind of fallen into that. And I think so many of us fall into things,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then what I want people to avoid is 20 years later going, how did I get here and what have I done with the last 20 years of my life?
Yeah. What's really my purpose?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's incredible. How did you then kind of 3,000 people is a lot of people. How did you kind of stay connected to such a big, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, look, there were lots of avenues, and it wasn't easy. There was certainly about 10% who didn't want to hear from us.
Yeah.
So, but because we'd obviously, funded their training, and we'd had ways of connecting with them. And as the program went on, we got more sophisticated. So there was an app for communication a little bit, not the beginning, but more towards the end. And, we had our own, if we were paying for outplacement, part of that service was that the career piece was that they had to check in and report back to us. And for those that didn't take it up, we would manage to connect to them. The one thing that I've never struck anywhere else, actually, and I've worked in a lot of companies, was there's a real passion for the brand. And I know a lot of companies say, we're a real family, but there was a passion for the brand at Holden that I actually haven't witnessed or experienced anywhere else. And what was originally seen as a real negative in that I don't know anyone outside of Holden, because everybody left, they've ended up with this amazing network, and they actually all still help each other.
Yeah.
So
nice.
they all still, now their network is like a big spider web where it wasn't before.
Yeah.
And many years on, those that they're connected to, they still, oh, look, I've got a job going here. Is anyone interested? And so it's really, there's been some real unexpected benefits for people, which from what was a negative before really turned around because they all had to go through it together.
Yeah, that's a real advantage. And I can imagine, at the start of this process, there would have been a lot of mistrust. There would have been, it would have been hard for people to say, trust you or trust the process or trust your intent of what you're actually trying to do, because this is not normally how, organizations operate.
Absolutely. So look, at the beginning, I put myself out in front of it and was prepared to be a bit of a punching bag, because sometimes people just need to vent, and why should they trust me? I've been hired in to do a job, they don't know me. But we just committed as a team to doing what we said we would do. And then we were lucky in that there were some really good leaders who were already doing the right thing. They were already, it was funny that not the crisis, but the situation forced a change. So the executive director of manufacturing really changed his personal interaction style. He became a lot more visible, and that was his own desire. No one told him to do that, but he became a lot more visible. He walked the plant floor more regularly. He stopped and talked to people more to see how they were doing. Are they okay? And you could tell that it was, his personal goal that everybody be looked after. And so it brought out a real, he changed, I think, because of it in a positive way.
Yeah. And that's the leadership that you need in those sorts of situations, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've heard, about, sort of kind of companies making people redundant and that type of thing. And there's something to like how people are treated on the way out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, people were brand advocates working for the company, but the good thing is they remained brand advocates, and actually were even stronger advocates on the way out because they were taken care of. And because, what we said we did.
Yeah. And Australia's really connected to Holden, isn't it, as a brand? It's kind of synonymous with, Australia in the sort of 70s, 80s, that type of thing.
Absolutely. And it's almost 6 degrees of separation. Like everybody has some sort of connection to Holden. Like I didn't even know that until after working there that, my grandfather was a Greek immigrant and he was a tailor,
Right.
when I knew him. And then after I started working there, my auntie said, "Oh, your grandfather used to work on the line during the war." And I went,
Yeah,
"Oh,
right.
okay."
Yeah.
And that was the thing, Holden, particularly during tough times, actually supported a lot of Australians. So it was, a really strong brand in that way,
Yeah.
and a strong part of Australia's history, I think.
So tell me, so the book then has taken these learnings and you've packaged it up so people can use this in their career when they're thinking about how they want to take their career forward, or maybe they're, tell me a little bit more about that.
So I used the research from what I'd uncovered in the interviews, and then I expanded it because automotive doesn't always feel relevant to everybody else. So I went and tested that with other people in other industries and different professions, and still found the same sort of theme. So I've packaged the book up into 3 key sections. The first one is really about self and others, and there's a lot of upfront work really checking in. Are you ready? I've seen a lot of being, in HR for so long. I've seen a lot of people who throw themselves into the job market, but there's certain things that are actually holding them back, and that you sort of got to address those things
Give
before
me
you.
some examples of those.
So when people are forced into having to make a move and they actually haven't reconciled that within themselves, they feel like they're bit of grieving, bit of lack of control, or potentially some negativity in how that happened, which, because rightly so, they weren't treated well. But unfortunately, as a potential new employer, if they haven't found a way to reconcile that, or at least understand, it comes out.
It comes out. I'm just thinking, I'm thinking one time I moved on from a role. I hadn't reconciled with it. I went and interviewed with someone and they actually said to me in this interview, "Gee, that last place sounded awful." And I thought, oh, I didn't get that job, obviously, because I was still jaded, really.
Yeah. And you're allowed to be.
Yeah.
But the problem is, from a new employer perspective,
they don't want
to know. The other thing is, obviously a lot of people are really motivated, but particularly if that last job has impacted their confidence, that's the other thing.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it?
And a poor workplace experience can impact your confidence, even for the most capable people. And so again, if you haven't check that before you start putting yourself in the market, again, that comes through even if you think it doesn't.
Yes. Yeah. And so how do you work on these things? Is it a matter of time? Is it a matter of addressing it? Is it a matter of, doing some, I kind of talk to people sometimes about doing practice interviews. Maybe not every job you go for is going to be the next opportunity, but if you interview with a few, you kind of practice and are able to craft your story or sell yourself, in a positive light, or figure out a feasible type of story to tell about that situation as well. Like, because you'll often get asked, "Why have you moved on from where you were?"
Oh, absolutely. So
and you don't want to say, "Well, let me," you
have I got a story for you
of how terrible that company really is.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably why a good, almost the majority of the book is actually in that upfront preparation before you put yourself in that scenario. So I have created some really simple, practical activities to help people reflect on those sorts of things, and hopefully address them, or find, or sometimes it's just the knowing about it is really gets you halfway there. And then all of the activities sort of build on themselves and give you tips then how to then create that narrative or that story of how you position yourself better. Because I'm all about being direct and honest, but there is certainly a way that you can explain scenarios that still paints you in a more positive light without being dishonest about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. Yeah, you can focus on what you've achieved in at that place and what you did, rather than how you felt when you left.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so, I really enjoyed blah, blah, blah.
Yes, exactly. And then when people have and a lot of the book is as well is really getting people to think more broadly. You know, a lot of people don't know what's out there. And let me give you an example. I spoke to a young girl who was a scientist. You know, she's in the lab and she's tired of working in the lab, and she talked to me about what she likes doing, and I said, and she loves communicating, but writing about scientific things. And I said, well, have you had a look at being a technical writer? She didn't know that job existed, but it actually does, you know, require all the things that she wants to be doing. And so it's really about people expanding their options about what might be next, because I believe there are multiple ways and multiple avenues to find satisfying and meaningful work. There's often more than one way to get that.
And I think you're right in terms of when you're in an organization, and particularly a big corporate, that it's very much about that corporate and about that world and all the rest of it. When you leave that place, you never hear anything about them again, you know, really, unless you're still connecting with the people there, or you read about them in the paper or whatever. But it's very encompassing when you're kind of in that environment. And then say if you shift somewhere else completely different.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a great opportunity, isn't it? You know, to move on to somewhere new. Not only do you learn new things and make new connections and, you know, and improve your confidence, because you prove to yourself you can do it, but it is that opportunity to become who you want to become. You know, you're not necessarily packaged in that box that you were in before, which unfortunately is human nature.
I always say to people, like, you know, when you're in a role, what do you want to get out of it? You know, rather than you're just there providing a service to the organization, what are you wanting to learn? What are you wanting to get out of it? What are your goals? And then how are you going to kind of take that forward?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, you know, what you've suggested there gives people that control, you know, rather than, I think people too often take the approach of just being the ship in the wind, you know, and being and bobbed around, but then you're at what they want you to do. And unless you're really clear of what you want, and there's still a way to do a win-win, you know, that the company gets what they want, but you also get out of it what you want.
You're focused on what you want. And then second to that, I say, what will you be allowed to achieve? You know, there'll be a point perhaps when you kind of rub up against, you know, the constraints of that organization. And so, you know, a lot of places say they're transformative and they're innovative and but the minute you try to do something like that, you'll get blocked. And so, you want to be clear on what you want to do there, and then what you'll be allowed to do as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that a lot of people don't realize, you know, I am I suppose a victim of naive optimism as well, but I've worked too long to know that if you don't beat the system, right, the house wins all the time. That's how the casinos are, you know, so you need to be quite realistic as an individual, and there will be change that you can affect, absolutely, but
not how much. Sounds like we've both knocked up against that one. When you found out that you might have pushed it a little further than you should have.
Yes, I've been told to get back in my box many times.
Yeah, I haven't realised that I've been told to get back in my box. I've kept going. Too funny. So the first bit is all around, you know, understanding yourself, understanding, you know, moving through the sort of where you're at. Tell me about the sort of next couple of phases. Then.
The next couple of phases is then the practicalities of it. So when you've understood yourself, and I've got some really practical activities, I think, you know, you mentioned earlier, I'm a capability expert. So as well as the strengths, I can help people really unpack more of those technical and people skills and the knowledge. And it's the combination of those that really give people the best chance to transfer into something new. Then because you've identified all of those things, I then help you bring it together with navigating the job market. Great, you know, and really practical, you know, a resume template. There's tons of them out there. Everybody thinks they're a resume template expert. I've been in the game 25 years and most of the resumes are terrible. And so, you know, there's multiples of others, but I certainly give lots of tips: the resume, the cover letter, the interview, and then negotiating. And then the last chapter is ordinary people who have gone on to and successfully changed, and just so it's inspirational stories from others, but real people, people that we can relate to. I don't know, it's probably a little bias of mine, knowing that I come from peasant stock, that I can't relate. I find them admirable, but an Oprah or a Michelle Obama or whoever, I can't relate to that. But other people like me who have made successful change, that's more relatable. So I've interviewed a few people, someone who was a former ballet dancer, and she's transformed her career into play therapy, and he's hoping to use dance and play therapy, and a whole range of other people, so that hopefully people can find some inspiration in their stories. And then
it is finding that inspiration for you, finding that purpose for you. And I've seen some people in my career who have say an organization's bought another organization and they haven't been sort of too happy with that change, but then they've a couple of years down the track, they've then found a new purpose and a new inspiration, and they're a changed person.
Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Amalia, how is it best for people to get in contact with you?
The best way to get in contact with me is my website. So it's Amalia Chilianis.
I just pronounced your name wrong.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I knew I was going to.
No, it's not an easy one, and I realised it's not that easy. It's not that easy to find either. But or else the book Workholistic is also available on all of the online retailers, so Amazon, Booktopia, Barnes and Noble. But on my website, there's a whole page of links.
Yeah, love it. And I think this has been a delightful chat, and great work at Holden. And I think fundamentally it's just being interested and trying to help people and hoping for a great outcome for them, really.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the motivation for the book. I don't have control of who buys it, but as long as it helps some people, and I just wanted to put down what I'd known and what I've learned, and in the hope that it helps people, get more out of their work. We spend so much time there, and so if it's helpful, then I've achieved what I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, beautiful. And look, that's the premise of this podcast. The premise of this podcast is to help people with their careers. So if you're a bit stuck in your career, give Amalia a call and get her to give you a little bit of hand with how you move forward in your career. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.